Hi, hello everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, and welcome to this keynote lecture of the Public Space Academy. This is Luisa Bravo, the founder and director of the Public Space Academy. As usual, we are hosting a distinguished researcher for this special series of the keynote lectures. And we will have a long lecture, about 45 minutes. And then in the end, we will have about 10-15 minutes of Q&A. So please, if you have any comments or questions for our speaker, write wherever you are on LinkedIn or YouTube. Write your question, and we will manage to bring your questions to our speaker. As you know, this is the seventh lecture that we host this year, 2025. So I'm glad to welcome today Dr. Anna Barker, Associate Professor in Criminal Justice and Criminology at the University of Leeds. Welcome, Anna.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm really glad to be part of this prestigious lecture series. So thanks for inviting me to talk.
Well, thank you, Anna, for accepting our invitation. Your lecture today will be on fostering safe and inclusive parks for women and girls. Anna's research examines the governance, safety, and social life of public spaces with a focus on gender, inclusion, and perceptions of insecurity. We have already hosted Anna Barker in our previous activities, including an exhibition that we had in Bologna at our headquarters, the Public Space Museum, and also later in November at the World Urban Forum in Cairo during a workshop of the Public Space Academy. Anna is also a member and senior advisor on public space for city space architecture. So I'm really glad to continue this collaboration and your contribution to the Public Space Academy. So now the floor is yours, and we will meet at the end for the discussion.
Thank you so much, Louisa. Thanks for having me to talk. I'm really looking forward to talking about my research and also the discussion afterwards. So the focus of my talk today is on the Safer Parks project, which I led in collaboration with the range of partners that you can see on screen here. And what we did is we translated research on women and girls' perceptions of safety in parks into practical guidance for the design and management of these spaces, a series of tools and training, really with the goal of equipping those who design, manage, police public spaces with the insights, the data, and the skills that they need in order to make these spaces safer and more inclusive and truly welcoming for everyone. So the Safer Parks programme began in 2021 with really a simple question, which was, why do so many women and girls feel unsafe in parks, and what can be done to change that? Obviously, parks as public spaces are hugely vital in cities. They're places for active travel. We walk between parks on our way to work, school, study, or on the way back. We use them to play, we use them to rest. They're places of social connection. Yet for women and girls, we know from my research and research across the world that they also remain places of unease and places of avoidance. And so our research really aimed through this programme to understand these experiences more deeply, and then to create some evidence-based guidance and tools on improving them for the future. So through this kind of sustained programme, you've kind of mapped out the timeline here. You can see we've built a robust evidence base about the factors shaping perceptions of safety in parks through a Q methodology and reviews of the literature. We've developed Safer Parks guidance based on women's lived experiences. We've incorporated this into a 3D visual model park as a training course for professionals to understand better gender sensitive design and management of these spaces. We've also been working with data analysts to create an open data dashboard which operationalizes the guidance using spatial indicators of park safety that related to the things that women and girls were talking about, whether that's lighting, layout, points of interest, and so forth. And then we've also gone on to take forward one of the key recommendations of the guidance, which is not just about design and management of these spaces, but it's also thinking about who are the bystanders in these spaces, whether that's other park users, whether that's volunteers from friends of groups, whether that's park staff, police officers, and so forth. And we've used the experiences that women and girls told us in our research around the harassment that they'd experienced to develop a customised bystander training programme for park managers and volunteers. And we've been delivering this across England and Wales so far and evaluating how well it's been working. So that's a kind of whistle-stop tour of what the programme is, and I'm now going to break that down into the lecture, which is organised around kind of three main parts. The first part being speaking about our research findings, focusing on what we've learned from speaking to women and girls about what makes a park feel safe or unsafe, recognising that they're not a homogenous group, and second, unpacking this kind of idea of this gendered burden of safety work, the work women do in public spaces to feel safe, originally the concept identified by Vera Gray and Kelly. We've used it and applied it in our parks context. And then third, thinking about how we foster change in public space design and management through this. So I wanted to start off with a bit about the problem that we're discussing here. We know from decades of research in criminology that gender emerges consistently as one of the strongest predictors of fear in public spaces, with women as a group reporting usually 2 or 3 times greater level of insecurity in public spaces than men. That's in Britain and across Europe and elsewhere. And this was originally discussed as the kind of crime fear paradox, often painting women as disproportionately irrational because of the level of crime that they faced in public spaces. But we've had decades of research since that this project builds on, which shows, you know, from feminist perspectives, from feminist scholars, challenging that framework and instead showing that really fear is gendered because actually the problem of crime and violence is gendered, and women's fears are not irrational but reflect the lived realities of harassment and threat, whether that's faced in public or private settings. So my own intervention in this debate is around the public space dimension around urban parks, and really how this plays out in urban parks that, as I've said, are really vital in cities in terms of their health, social and community benefits, but remain sites of unease. So I wanted to show you this graph from the British context here, and this, I suppose, gave some attention to the topic of parks themselves, which I think have been sidelined in these debates, because it shows that women feel less safe in parks than in other types of public spaces. And so the Office for National Statistics undertake kind of lifestyle surveys and have now started asking women about their sense of insecurity in different types of settings. And so the headline is that women feel less safe in parks than in other types of public spaces, whether that's residential streets, busy public spaces like town centres or on public transport. But also the data shows that, you know, the gendered inequalities in perceived safety are stark. You can see here the difference between men and women. And this basically means that in Britain, taking that context, women are 3 times more likely to say they feel unsafe in parks during the day. It's about 1 in 6 women compared to about 1 in 20 men. And then after dark, that rises significantly. So 4 in 5 women tell us that they feel unsafe in parks after dark, compared to about 2 in 5 men, again, still high. And we know that I live in a place where it gets dark as early as 4 p.m. from next month when the clocks turn back. So we know that this is a time actually where, you know, it can be dark when women and girls coming back from work or school or study. And obviously parks provide these kind of key connecting routes in cities. So obviously we can take these figures in the abstract, but what it means is that there are kind of thousands of women who say they feel unsafe, and this affects how they behave in these spaces. And I wanted to draw on here, use the work of Vera Kay and Vera Gray and Kelly, because women's fear actively shapes their what's called their safety work. This was a concept that they developed to kind of describe the coping mechanisms or the everyday practices that women and girls routinely use to mitigate risks of harassment and violence, and to make them feel safer in public spaces, whether that's avoiding certain spaces at certain times, not going alone, carrying your keys, going with others, changing what you wear, changing how you look, these types of things. There's a whole range and body of work on the extent of women's work that they're doing in public spaces to, as I said, avoid harassment or violence or feel safer. And it connects to the feminist theories of invisible work, which has been explored in a variety of domains around the kind of unpaid and devalued labour that's traditionally performed by women in caring roles, in emotional management, and in daily life. And safety work can take different forms. It's often hidden or invisible work. It's often seen as part of women's identity, part of what they do, rather than seen as kind of a burden or an effort. It can be direct or indirect, so that means it can be consciously planned or unconsciously. We do all this work to keep ourselves safe. And it can be preemptive or self-protective, so it can be planned in advance or done in the moment itself. But this kind of work is rarely seen as work at all. It's often taken for granted as part of what it's meant to be a woman, of how women act and so forth. So it's often hidden and rendered invisible. And so to explore these questions, we used a Q methodology study. This is a kind of a mixed method approach, which I'll talk about the method in a bit more detail. And we asked essentially 3 fundamental questions using this approach. What makes parks feel safe or unsafe? How do the views of professionals compare with the views of women and girls? And what impact does fear have on the behaviour of women's behaviour and their access to parks? And we interviewed women and girls from very diverse backgrounds, as well as professionals in our case study area of West Yorkshire. The findings are in these reports, but I'm just going to give you some flavour of what we found. So our first finding highlighted a clear kind of perception gap that women and girls view parks, the majority of women and girls view parks as unsafe spaces for women and girls, whereas professionals perceive them as relatively safe here. And I've put that on the slide to show that there is this gap, although when we spoke to professionals in terms of what they felt would make parks feel safer, there wasn't a gap there in terms of their alignment with women and girls. They all kind of were reasonably on the same page as to what would make parks feel safer. So we started the Q methodology study really by reviewing the range of evidence that's out there already. Obviously, all research builds on and is incrementally and builds on other research that's been done. So we identified essentially the wide range of potential factors from previous research that could influence perceptions of safety in public spaces and in parks in particular, many of which you can see illustrated here on this slide. So these factors range from broad societal issues like sexism and harassment to more specific issues around that public space in particular, around its design and its management, like presence of lighting or vegetation or staffing or signage or maintenance, or who's using the space and how are they using the space. And so Q methodology is a really useful approach because it explores how these different factors fit together and how they shape perceptions of safety. And it can also show which ones are more important in shaping perceptions of safety than others. It can also show areas of consensus, so areas where women and girls agree on that makes a park feel safe or unsafe, and differences amongst women, so essentially not essentializing them as a homogenous group, but actually understanding there are divergence in views on safety. So in essence, it's basically an approach that says there may be as many views on safety as there are people watching this YouTube video. There is, it's inherently a subjective experience, we know that, but that actually, when you look at all of these factors, people's perspectives often cluster around certain distinguishing factors that shape their perceptions of safety in public spaces. And then we can say that essentially how women and girls cluster in these factors gives us these kind of different shared viewpoints on safety. So we can say, there are 3 different ways in which women and girls experience and think about safety in public spaces. So how does this method work? So in essence, we took all of those factors and we turned them into a series of statements about safety in parks. So it might be, I feel safe in parks after dark, or lighting would make parks feel safer, or I feel safer in parks when I go with my friends and family. So we turned them into a set of statements that represent the diverse issues, the diverse factors that could influence perceptions of safety. And then we interview women and girls and we ask them to essentially sort these statements onto a grid that you can see on the screen here. It's an inverse bell-shaped curve grid. And we ask them initially to sort them into 3 different piles, into statements that are like their view, statements that are unlike their view, and statements where they're more neutral towards, or they may have kind of different contextual opinions on. So again, we're getting women and girls to think about things that they agree or disagree with. And once they've done that first level of sorting, they do a second stage of sorting, which is putting the statements on the grid itself. And you can see that the grid is organised from +5 to -5, which is ranging from statements that are most like their views in one side to statements that are most unlike their view. And the kind of middle column here, the middle columns represent where participants are more uncertain or neutral or ambivalent. So it's kind of relative in terms of you're placing the statements that are relative rather than absolute agreement with each statement. And so you start off with looking at ones that are like their view, and you take the 2 key statements that are most like their view, so whether it's, and that most shape their perceptions of safety, thinking about their local parks. So if it's that lighting is there, they will put that like their view, or whether it's the presence of other people. And then you go on to most unlike their view, and then you kind of gradually work towards the middle. And once you've done this process with lots of different women and girls, we spoke to 117 women and girls, so you can see the number of grids pile up, and then you can also do, we also did practitioners. You then essentially do some factor analysis. So you identify factors, in other words, clusters of participants who rank the statements in a statistically similar way. And that basically finds that there are different clusters of women who place the statements in different ways, showing that there are kind of different viewpoints on safety in public spaces. And the ones that are kind of populated there, you can see in green, are ones that, irrespective of those views, irrespective of your perception of safety in parks, there are areas of consensus that unite women and girls in terms of their views. So what did we find? So we revealed that women and girls, first of all, don't hold a single shared uniform view of safety in urban parks. Rather, their perceptions and experiences are diverse, but a small number of views. So among teenage girls, we found there are kind of three distinct worldviews on safety in parks. And really, we organised these into how they felt that restrictions to their right to the park might be transformed. So we've got here change people, change parks, and change society. And we can immediately see then that together these perspectives highlight that achieving safety and achieving that sense of welcomeness in parks requires change both inside and outside of parks, in public spaces and institutions and broader societal structures. So our change people viewpoint really sees this parks as kind of dynamic social spaces where access, safety and belonging are shaped by other people's presence and other people's behaviour in these spaces, especially men and boys and older teenagers who girls felt often dominated the park spaces. So you can see a kind of illustrative quote here. It's the people in the park that are the problem, not the actual park. And so girls aligned with this view felt that urban design improvements cannot alone overcome the kind of gendered power relations that are built in the kind of everyday harassment that they were talking about and experiencing in these spaces. Our second worldview was amongst teenage girls was change parks, and girls in this view were much more optimistic about the potential for parks themselves to be designed and managed in a way that were safer and more inclusive and welcoming. And this was also aligned with the kind of familiarity of the space themselves. So girls that aligned with this viewpoint were advocating for lots of different changes, a more holistic view on how parks can be made safer, including better lighting, visible staff, organised activities, open layouts, and other things which they felt could make them feel safe enough to use the space, but also prevent crime and reduce harassment. So illustrative, the more things that make you feel safer to be in parks, obviously, the more you're going to be in parks. And then our third worldview from teenage girls was really reflecting that actually the roots of girls' feelings of unsafety lay in the kind of wider societal structures of sexism and misogyny. And for these participants, almost whilst design changes could play a role, these couldn't. They felt that they couldn't, offset necessarily the kind of threat posed by predatory male behaviour. As the quote typically says there, if sexism wasn't a thing, none of it would happen. And really this perspective is pointing to the kind of gender inequality that needs to be addressed in order for girls to feel safer in public spaces overall. And so drawing on Moser's work on gender planning, we argue that these kind of worldviews highlight the need for both practical interventions within parks and strategic societal change beyond them. And really the viewpoints naturally mirror long-standing debates in the fear of crime literature between advocates of design-based solutions and those who locate women's fear in patriarchal power relations. But ultimately what the girls were almost teasing out was this need for multifaceted action across spatial, social and structural dimensions. In terms of women, we also found three different viewpoints shaped how women think about safety in urban parks. And we've called these independent women, fearful feminists and danger spotters. Our independent women basically rejects this current status quo of women feeling unsafe and lacking independence. They feel that that's really unacceptable status quo and that really needs to change. That women holding this perspective want authorities to take more responsibility for enabling their independent use of parks throughout the day and across season, across times when it gets dark early. And they really advocate, similarly to some of the girls here, the kind of better design solutions, clear ways of seeking help, more lighting, more visible staff, help points, and also the role that men can play as allies, and thinking about men's etiquette in public spaces by giving women physical space, and also playing a role in actively challenging harassment. So to change the burden of safety work on women and girls to actually to authorities taking more responsibility in this regard. Our second we've called Fearful Feminists. And this was a perspective that similarly kind of reflected a deep sense of insecurity that, you know, potentially all parks are potentially unsafe for women, and that essentially the way to achieve meaningful change here is that broader social transformation, addressing gendered violence. But until that point, they would essentially continue doing the safety work, continue avoiding parks when alone or after dark, steering clear of secluded areas, and kind of actively kind of using their networks or participating in parks as part of organised groups or with friends and family. And then our third one was danger spotters, and this was where essentially parks were, you know, the safety of parks was seen as more conditional, and they wanted parks to be designed to help women look out more for danger, whether that might be other men that they're risk assessing, or whether that might be what's happening in that space. So open vistas were really significant within this viewpoint in terms of creating spaces that felt safe. So what I've painted here is divergence amongst women and girls in terms of how they think about and perceive safety in public spaces and the different factors that play into that. But I also wanted to get across that actually, as a body, there was a lot of strong agreement and consensus amongst women and girls in terms of what can be done to create safer parks, no matter where they're aligned in terms of those viewpoints. So there were clear areas where they all agreed on as being strongly important. And so the strongest point of agreement amongst women was that the presence of other women in a park signals a safe space. And really, this shapes our philosophy about designing these spaces, because it means that the most effective way to design parks to feel safer is to design and manage them in ways that feel as welcoming and as appealing as possible to a diverse cross-section of women and girls. And really then to encourage these kind of ripple effects. So by encouraging women's use, parks can create these kind of positive ripple effects where women's presence becomes this visible signal of safety, helping other women to feel more confident and comfortable spending time there. And that was what women and girls were telling us in the qualitative work that came out of it. As you can see some of these quotes on the slide. They feel a lot better when they see other women there. They think that actually there's lots of women using these spaces because other women are doing the same. Yet, despite the presence of other women making parks feel safer, women frequently noted that actually their safety needs and their recreational needs are not reflected in kind of standard park design and standard park management practices. So as one participant mentioned, if parks were designed with women, you might see better lighting, you might see more signage, you might see more patrolling. They also stress the importance of designing parks that actually cater to women and girls' recreational needs, and that acknowledging that these may be different to the needs of men and boys. So another woman said, if you go to a park, you get basketball courts, you get football fields, you get gym stuff. It aims at men. There's nothing that aims for women to do in a park. Not saying that women can't play football or don't, that's not at all, but actually that there are differences in needs that we should take into account to if we are going to foster a space that is inclusive, and through that inclusivity send signals to others. So a core aspect of what was coming from women was a need for gender sensitive approaches to park design and management, emphasising the things that appeal to women and girls, which are going to be different in different areas because women are different surrounding different parks. So guidance can only ever be general. And so at the heart of our work is actively listening to the women and girls who are surrounding your local parks, thinking about the distinctive needs of that group, and co-designing interventions with them. So it's not just about design, but the second core areas of consensus were around, and this might not be surprising at all, but around kind of well-used parks and organised activities feel safer. So the idea that a well-used park feels safer was a really strong area of agreement. Women were telling us that they preferred visiting parks that had that kind of routine busyness to them, that were well used, that maybe had regular activities going on, like running groups and so forth, that would create kind of passive surveillance, other potential bystanders, bring in volunteers or staff into the space and contribute to a greater sense of safety. And so busyness and activation underpins kind of important principles for our guidance. And then women also reported feeling safer when they use parks as part of organised activities, whether that's sports, exercise, social events, volunteering, really activities that might feel safe alone, like running after dark, for instance, that might become more accessible in a group setting, providing safety in numbers and keeping parks active and well used. So this woman in the quote here says that she actually goes along when there are activities going on in the park, not just not to take part in them, but actually because there is this kind of safety in numbers. Yet even with these kind of positive examples, many women describe the ongoing effort involved in simply accessing or enjoying parks, a kind of constant calculation of risk and adaptation of behaviour that shaped their everyday activities. And so we developed this kind of concept of safety work that Vera Gray and Kelly outline in terms of the kind of work that exists around parks. And we kind of categorize this in terms of the avoidance strategy. We call this the work of avoiding parks, the effort that it takes to avoid parks in certain circumstances when you're alone or after dark, whether that's taking a longer route or so forth. In terms of preemptive strategies, and we call this the work of accessing parks. So that's planning to access parks, which can be enabling and limiting. Whether that's waiting to go with a friend or whether that's timing it so you're visiting when you know there is an organised activity going on. And then situational tactics, we call this the work in parks, and that's the behaviour that women take in the moment within parks themselves in order to potentially avoid a threat or feel safer. So just to kind of show some of the quotes from women and girls talking about these three aspects of safety work in parks. So we've got here the work of avoiding parks. We've got, for example, here, even when it's the most direct way, I absolutely don't walk through it when it's dark. So the work of taking longer routes was pretty common in our themes. Where they've heard about assault, you can see where there was an assault and I had to change cutting through the park to get my son to go the long way round. So that kind of, even if it's not harassment and violence that's happened, but it's harassment and violence that you've heard about in that particular space. And then also the gendered, women we know are more likely to do a lot of the trying to trip chaining work in terms of taking kids to school, and actually kind of like relinquishing women of that by providing safe routes for children to walk to school by themselves is one way of kind of relinquishing the kind of burden on women. As this kind of quote said, I actually have to drop them off because I don't feel that the local park's the safe route to go to for my kids to go to school. And then the kind of work to access parks. So women are doing a lot of work themselves in order to kind of, whether that's the kind of mental load, but essentially the careful planning around different factors, whether that's the time of day, the location, the presence of others, we're choosing to visit parks at certain times. So as this quote says, I don't like walking in empty parks. So when I go to a park, I need timing. It will be school times, or it will be busy, or there'll be dog walkers. So it will be planning the time to walk in the park on your own. So taking these kind of preemptive strategies to actually access parks and their benefits. And so essentially these practices, this kind of work that we're doing, is both enabling, it enables us to use the park, but that enablement is conditional. It's conditional on the times of the day being busier, or it's conditional on certain other factors. But it's also constraining, because it means that at other times the park isn't an accessible place to us. So it's contingent and limited to certain times, or when there's certain company present, or so forth. And then finally, unpacking that work in parks themselves. So this was the kind of, whilst we're working to use the parks, when we're actually in there, in the park themselves, the kind of self-protective tactics and strategies we take in the moment, whether we see, for instance, there is a man behind us, we change our direction, so we let them go in front of us. Or are we risk assessing who's in the park themselves, the kind of mental load that takes? Should I take a different route? Should I go try use the phone now? Should I try and work out where is the safer space in the park, where other people are around? And some women who, where English was second language, they kind of used a strategy of actually making themselves look like they didn't understand English. So if someone was harassing them or talking to them, they could kind of put on some face work to try to change that approach. So this these strategies really reveal the kind of mental burden of women that they carry around when using public spaces, this kind of continual risk assessment about where, when, and how to move through parks and public spaces. And it kind of gets down to that kind of hidden work that they're doing. And in essence, you know, it tells us that in the context of gendered fear and male violence, parks that are intended as places for recreation and leisure actually become spaces of vigilance and self-management, and kind of gendered sites of access, rather than these kind of more leisured spaces. But importantly, also, what they talked about is that actually the way the park is designed and managed can either enable or constrain this safety work. It can either make them kind of relax in these spaces or heighten their vigilance. And so again, this underpins the kind of real need for kind of gender sensitive approaches to urban design and management. And that's where I want to take the last part of this talk for the next 5 minutes, which is to improve these kind of gender disparities in park access. We co-created guidance called Safer Parks Guidance, Improving Access for Women and Girls, which we launched back in 2023, and we've just launched the second edition in last month in 2025. And we used women and girls' lived experiences and their viewpoints on safety to then work with parks managers, urban designers, police officers, women's safety organisations to bring together professional expertise with women's and girls' expertise to create practical principles and interventions for inclusive park design and management. And we've got this embedded now. So thinking about how we create change from our research, change on society, lasting change that maybe isn't just to one park, but to many parks. We've managed to get this embedded because we worked closely in partnership with Keep Britain Tidy, who manage the Green Flag Award programme, which, if anyone doesn't know, is the leading international accreditation for parks and green spaces, essentially the good practice standard for how a park should be designed and managed. It runs across, I think, 20 countries at the moment, in about 2,000 to 2,500 parks. And so our guidance is now embedded as supplementary guidance to that programme, so that when parks are applying for the accreditation, that they are encouraged to use and access the Safer Parks guidance in order to plan their management accordingly. And we've also recently had endorsement from Secured by Design, which is the official police initiative in order to design safer spaces. And so will be embedded also in policing practices. As I said, we rooted the design of this document with consultation across parks managers, architects, landscape architects, planners, academics, women's safety organisations, alongside women and girls themselves. And that led us to organise the guidance under 10 principles built around 3 themes: eyes on the park, awareness, and inclusion. I'll just briefly introduce these. So Eyes on the Park is a nod to the great urbanist Jane Jacobs. It emphasises that safety is enhanced when parks have this constant mixed activity, creating well-used spaces, which really spoke to our research, and that the presence of staff and other authority figures creates a sense of security and guardianship. And then awareness, which you might kind of traditionally interpret as the kind of design features, focuses on designing parks with features that make women and girls feel more secure by enhancing their ability to see and be seen, easily, intuitively navigate the park spaces, and to avoid feeling trapped, because actually feeling trapped and the ability to escape was really important in the research. So key design elements include open areas, lighting, escape routes, and essentially all these kind of features that play a role in fostering a sense of control over one's environment, thereby enhancing our sense of safety and necessarily having to reduce our kind of burden of our mental load on safety work. And then the third theme of the guidance is inclusion. And this is about making women and girls feel that they belong in the park, that they're engaged with how the space is created, and that everybody across a wide range of intersectional identities feel that the park is theirs and for them. So you can see that there are different principles under each of these key themes, and we go into the guidance in much more depth. You're welcome to download it and have a look. There's some really good practical examples. And alongside those principles, we've gathered different case studies from the UK and abroad in how the principles can be applied across different budgets and scales. So there's lots of inspiration there in order to how to move forward with this work, but there's also a host of quick wins, things that can be done easily, intuitively, and at a low cost. We've then oops, I can't play this, but we've worked with various other companies, including Studio 31, to develop a interactive 3D park model, which helps practitioners explore how design and management affect perceptions of safety, and how we can think about designing more gender-sensitive in more gender-sensitive ways. So we have a kind of a park that is potentially kind of not designed as well for a women and girls sense of inclusion and safety, and then a kind of park that's been redesigned with the principles in mind to foster how we can understand how we can actually make a difference physically on the ground in these spaces. And then we've also been working with data scientists at the University of Leeds to create an open data dashboard. And we've developed a prototype dashboard at the moment for a particular city, and we're hoping to expand that much more wider. And this essentially brings together indicators of safety in a spatial context. So whether that's lighting, whether that's the presence of statues that are kind of female statues, or whether that's the well-used routes through the spaces, all the kind of indicators of safety that women and girls were talking about, and looking at the open data that's available on those, and then putting that into a map that's organised according to the guidance principles as well. And then this kind of open data dashboard is available to local authorities, policing teams, community groups to support decision making on different park spaces. So as I said, it's at the moment it's in one city in England, and we're looking to scale this up across England and Wales and potentially further. But at the moment, our ambitions are to scale it up across England and Wales. And finally, we've also we've been developing guidance and then these other tools in order to enhance the guidance use and uptake and implementation. But one of the core rationales for the guidance, one of the core kind of recommendations from the guidance was active bystander training for those who work or volunteer or use public spaces, because everyone plays a role in creating a safer space and a safer park. And this came about because one of the core areas of consensus was that women and girls felt it was easier and safer to ignore harassment, and they felt that they couldn't rely on others to intervene when harassment happened in a public space. And so this was really about fostering not just the design changes, but actually who's in those spaces and what they can do and build their skills and their confidence in order to intervene when harassment happens, to chip away at those kind of social norms that and the societal reasons that create parks that are feeling unsafe. So we worked with the Suzy Lamplugh Trust, a national personal safety charity, Keep It Tidy and Green Flag Award, to develop bystander training for park staff and volunteers. We initially did this in West Yorkshire itself and then have scaled to 6 locations across the UK. And we've been evaluating the impact of that on bystander barriers and confidence to intervene through pre and post surveys. So it's the first study of evaluation of bystander training in the park sector. And in order to make the training directly relevant to the park's context, because a lot of bystander training programs might deal with public transport or the nighttime economy, for instance, we wanted to make sure that this was relevant to the park and green space setting. So we worked with the sexual violence prevention trainers and parks managers in order to use the scenarios that women and girls were telling us in our research about when they'd experienced harassment, what happened, in order to co-design scenarios that in the training parks managers and volunteers would discuss and apply the 5 Ds of bystander intervention: distract, delegate, document, delay, and direct. So we had scenarios covering intersectional forms of harassment, whether that was about gender or racism, lone women joggers or sitting on benches, and kind of groups of harassment. And we've found positive results. So from our pre and post surveys, we've been looking at the findings of those, and we found that the training has showed signs of reducing barriers to bystander interventions across all the different barrier domains that we looked at, including whether you're noticing harassment happening, whether you're identifying it as a risk, whether other people's behaviour is affecting you, or whether your safety concerns would prevent you from intervening. And we've also found our results are showing the training's increased participants' confidence and skills to apply these different skills in distraction, delegation, delay, and document, and being direct in terms of being a bystander. So it's reduced barriers to intervening and increased confidence and skills. And importantly, it does that without causing any harm. So one of the things you need to do when you're looking at training programs is to see whether there's any harm or backlash from your training or approach. We found that the levels were very low, and really supports that kind of bystander training reduces more defensiveness in this regard by treating people as allies, not as perpetrators or as victims. We've also rolled this out, given the success in terms of a national campaign. You may have seen it on socials, but using the media, using social media, and using physical posters in parks, we've developed a campaign in partnership with Suzy Lamplugh Trust and Keep Britain Tidy to encourage people and staff and volunteers and park users to get free training in active bystandership. So I want to end by saying thank you for listening. Please do download the guidance from the Green Flag Award or Secure by Design Hub and start taking action in your own spaces today. So I'm going to leave it here by saying, quoting one of the women and girls who was in our research, and this is where we want to end up. It's about being safe on my own. I'm independent and I'd like to feel that way. Thank you. I'll hand back to Louisa.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you for this very comprehensive overview of your work, which it is absolutely amazing. So my first question to you is, when did you start? Because I've been following this research now for more than 2 years, but I think you started well before, because considering all these amazing results that you are presenting, it's not just about surveys or interviews, but you have developed design recommendations, mapping, a campaign. So how did this start, and when did you start approaching this topic?
Probably actually my PhD in 2006. So wow. I did my PhD on people's perceptions of safety, but it was really back in 2021 when I was approached by the Mayor of West Yorkshire to be part of a bid for government funding around creating safer spaces, and we decided to work together on this parks project. So 2021 we got our first set of funding, but every stage we've applied for new funding to create new guidance, new tools, and to actually make sure that the research is used and actually used in society.
Yeah, well, it looks like a very successful research project. So my question is, do you actually feel that these research outputs are able to make a change? You know, are you experimenting some kind of feedbacks? Because you talked about trainings for park officials. So how do people react when people that are in charge, you know, to manage parks, how do they react when you present these findings and these feelings and perceptions and fears that women and girls have to access parks?
It's a really good question, or set of questions there, I think. The overwhelming response has been really positive. And I think in both the parks management circles and policing circles, it's been really well received in the sense that this is something that's needed. And I guess something that's also been overlooked, not out of maliciousness, but just out of, oh, you've opened our eyes to the fact that actually we're not designing these spaces in this way, and we really should be doing something about it. Even to the extent where, for instance, if people are doing some research and finding that their local facilities in their park are dominantly used by men and boys, they're saying, actually, all the money we're spending in these spaces isn't being equitably used. So it is creating change. But as you know, change does take quite a long time to embed. So what we've been focusing on is actually kind of building an understanding of the differences that women and girls face in public spaces, an understanding of the desire to embed that in their program, so that when they conduct their own local piece of work around their particular parks, they are actually taking that framework in mind. So yes, so we're looking and we're trying to actually measure the impact of that, but it's reasonably challenging.
So you think this project can continue with some additional outputs?
So yes, so our next stage is we're hoping that the open data dashboard, we can scale that up so that it becomes more of a national initiative. And, you know, if there's any collaborators out there who want to take it wider, But yes, we see that, I suppose, the scope for development now is around thinking about how we do embed those tools to make them really usable for the people who are designing and policing public spaces. So they're not kind of an abstract open data dashboard or an abstract piece of research, but they can actually see how it applies in their own settings. So that's our next stage of the research.
Well, in fact, I was just about to ask, because you said you showed a slide with some recommendations for designers, and actually, since I'm an urban designer, I while you were presenting, I was asking myself, how can I translate this knowledge into a design activity, or what kind of training do I need when I approach the design of even a small garden? Doesn't have to be like a huge park. I mean, because, you know, these feelings of unsafety sometimes are related to even small spaces. It doesn't have to be like a huge public park. So, and since, for example, in Bologna, as you know, we are managing a small garden with city space architecture. So actually, myself also had this experience. I had this experience that some women said that they wanted some light in this small garden during nighttime to prevent any possible feeling of unsafety, especially during the summer. You know, people are outside and they enjoy open green spaces, and they like the idea to sit and feel safe. So I mean, this is more like a reflection rather than a question, but it's very important, and this is what we try to do also with the Public Space Academy, to translate theory into a tangible result that can inform action and implementation. So I think this is really crucial, especially to link the academic world with the professional world. What do you think?
I mean, I come from the view that actually I want to make a difference, not just because I am a woman and I'd like the place to be safer, but because I do actually think that's what our real value is, isn't it? We can contribute to new knowledge, which is hugely important, but also making a difference actually out there, and moving from theory to practice is where we want to be. That's why the guidance, I can only show you the principles, but in the guidance document, if you download it, there's lots of practical interventions for what to consider in the public space itself, aligned with each of those principles. And the online 3D park training is, again, about showing that implementation, about thinking about what a landscape might look like very differently. The landscape will look very different and the design might look very different, or there might be some simple small changes with this lens applied to it. And I just think it's you know, we see there are some fantastic case studies from around the world where these principles have been applied. I say Omea, you know, Vienna. We know that it's also at the policy level where every decision is taken through a gendered lens, and that's where we'd love to push for and have that taken.
Well, yes, absolutely. And I'm very glad that you gave this lecture. As I mentioned, you had already previous engagements with the Public Space Academy. And for those of you who would like to read more and explore more regarding the work of Anna Barker, you can go on our OpenEdX platform, because there is a small lecture also from Anna in the mini course Imagining Public Space with and for her. And also I like to mention that last year we published with Anna Barker a special issue of the Journal of Public Space titled Let Her Guide You. in collaboration with the Her City program of UN Habitat. And the issue was intended to collect research outputs from young women, young scholars, female scholars, and to also include their perspective into the research stream that it is mostly dominated by, senior academics. So the effort is also to give voice to young generations and to collect experiences from them to create a more nuanced and complex understanding of public space and public parks, of course. So now let me see if there are any questions from the audience. Well, it seems that checking the screen, it seems that we do not have questions. Well, usually those who are attending online are just rushing at the very end of the lecture to write some questions. So maybe we can actually wait for a couple of minutes for some questions. I see a very nice comment here from one of from our learners that are following your lecture. Thank you for appreciation. I don't know if you want to add something before we close the lecture, Anna.
I'm glad. Thank you very much for inviting me, and I really think that it's such an important avenue for us all to explore in our local areas. So please do, when you have time, have a look at the guidance and see how it applies in your area.
Yes, so we will provide links to your content for those of you who would like to discover more regarding the Academy and future opportunities, please subscribe to our newsletter. We will also announce very soon the next keynote lecture, and we will inform you about next activities and how to be engaged in our workshops in 2026. So thank you again, Anna, for joining us, and real pleasure to listen to your work again. And that's it. So see you soon.
Thank you. Bye. Bye, everyone.